तत्त्वातो नमसे समण्डलपति शनि सदा तुच्छम भूत्वा दीनगणेश करुणया कोऽपि न कण्ठाश्रितौ कृष्ण कीर्तन गान नर्तन पनो प्रेमामृतं बनिधि धीराधीर जनप्रियौ प्रियकरौ निर्मत्सरौ पूजितौ श्री चैतन्य कृपा भरो भुवि भुव भारावहंतारको वंदे रूप सनातन रघुजगो श्री जीव गोपालको कृष्ण कीर्तन गान नर्तन परो प्रेमामृतं बनिधि धीरा धीर जनप्रियं प्रियकरौ निर्मत्सरौ पूजितौ नाना शास्त्र विचारणैकनिपुणं सद्धर्म संस्थापकं लोकानां हितकारिणं त्रिभुवने मन्नं शरण्यात्मनौ नाना शास्त्र विचारणैकनिपुणं सद्धर्म संस्थापकं लोकानां हितकारिणं त्रिभुवने मन्नं शरणाकरं राधा कृष्ण पदारविन्द भजनानन्देन मत्वालिकौ वन्दे रूप सनातनौ रघुजुगौ श्रीजीव गोपालको कृष्ण कीर्तन गान नर्तन परो प्रेमामृतं बनिधि श्री चैतन्य कृपा भरो भुवि भुव भारावहंतारको वंदे रूप सनातन रघुजुगौ श्री जीव गोपालको श्री गौरांग गुणानुगणन विभो सध्यासनिधानितं पापत्रापनिकृन्तनं तनभितां गोविन्द गानामृतैः श्री गौरांग गुणानुगणन विधौ सध्यासनिधानितं पापत्रापनिकृन्तनं तनभितां गोविन्द गानामृतैः आनन्दान्बुधिवर्धनैकनिपुणौ कैवल्यनिस्वार्थौ वन्दे रूप सनातनौ रघुजुगौ श्रीजीव गोपालको कृष्ण
Gomagyanatmirandasya Gyananjanasalakaya Chakshurunmilitam yena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha Adunulambito bujo kanakabadatu Sankirtanaika pitaro kamalaya taksho Vishwambaro dvijabaro yugadharma palo Vande jagat priyakaro karunavataro Vande Shri Krishna Chaitanya Nityananda Sahodito Gurudaya Pushpavanto Chitra Sangdo Tamuno Vandeham Shri Ramakrishna Abhayo Charanostako Sukado Paramanando Sundaro Subalapriyo He Krishna Karuna Sindhu Dinabandhu Jagatpate Gopisha Gopika Kanta Radha Kanta Namostude Tapta Kanchana Gurangi Radhe Vrindavaneshwari Vrishabhanu Sute Devi Pranamami Haripriye.
Shri Gaudiya Vaishnav Guru Parampara Ki Jai, Shri Jiva Goswami Ki Jai, Sat Sandarbhas Ki Jai, Ananta Kota Vaishnavinda Ki Jai. Glorious devotees, thank you for attending another presentation on Shri Jiva Goswami's Sat Sandarbhas. Today we will try to finish up with our overview of the Tattva Sandarbha, which is basically an introduction to the entirety of Jiva Goswami's treatise, Sat Sandarbha. And we will do a quick review here of where we are. Just to remind us, the Tattva Sandarbha can be divided into three main areas. An invocation, Mangalacharana, auspiciousness, and invoking auspiciousness in different ways, through offering of obeisances, through blessings upon the reader, and also by giving a summary of what's going to be presented. And also Jiva Goswami in his Mangalacharana adds an additional criteria of the eligibility of someone to enter into the mysteries of his Sat Sandarbhas. So we've reviewed the invocation, then we went to epistemology. What is the praman, or the evidence in support of the relationship between the Sat Sandarbhas and the subject that they are presenting? And therein, after some lengthy discussion, Jiva Goswami emphatically declares that of all the scripture that's available to humanity, at this point in time, excuse me, the Bhāgavata Purāṇa, Srimad Bhagavatam, is the topmost praman, and specifically the topmost praman based upon the criteria that represents the nature of the literature itself. And then that leads us into the ontology of the Tattva Sandarbha. So epistemology is what's a reliable source for knowledge. And ontology is, if we have a reliable source of knowledge, what's worth knowing? And we began in last week's discussion with the ontology section of the Tattva Sandarbha, wherein Jiva Goswami presents the fact that the praman, the Bhāgavata Purāṇa, Srimad Bhagavatam, is based upon the revelation, the spiritual insights of both the author, Srila Vyasadeva, and the speaker, Srila Sukadeva Goswami. So their experience was beyond that of the senses. It was beyond. It's trans-empirical, transcendental to the empirical sense perception and the body-mind complex that's utilized to acquaint ourselves with the world around us and acquire knowledge of that world. So diving into the world of spirituality and a deeper understanding of the reality of even the environment that we inhabit, the material world, there is a higher methodology to acquiring that knowledge, and that knowledge is about the nature of our being. And it naturally entails, when we're learning about truly the entirety of ourselves, it's a comprehensive knowing will lead us to looking at knowledge that not only gives us awareness of the environment in which we live, but also the nature of our self and the inner nature of being. There's something beyond just what we can perceive with our material senses. So all this constitutes the knowable. So Jiva begins with that explanation, as I said, looking to what did the author, Srila Vyasadeva, experience in his trans-empirical revelation, his samadhi, and through that experience, make available to human society in a written form as best as is conveyable in words, what that experience was all about. And simply, there were three main components of his revelation. In his revelation, he saw the supreme absolute truth in all of its aspects, Brahman, Paramatma, and Bhagavan. He saw the various Shaktis of the Lord, and one of which is the Tatastha Shakti, the Jiva Shakti, the Bahiranga Shakti. And he also saw the Bahiranga Shakti, the material Shakti, which is attracting that Tatastha Shakti, which can go either way. It can go either towards the spiritual or towards the material. And he saw that, of course, through his own experience, that in the material world, the living entity is not 100% satisfied. So he saw the remedy for that dissatisfaction being a complete turning of consciousness towards the living entity's inner self and a loving relationship with the source of that self. So we're going to continue now with the completion of the ontological analysis of Jiva Goswami. And so we look first of all to the revelation of the author and the speaker, Sukadeva. Again, Sukadev's revelation through hearing the Bhagavatam is extraordinary in that he was already completely detached from worldly engagement. He'd already recognized the significance of not being involved in the world of samsara, that there was no redeeming quality. In fact, he recognized that to such an extent that it said that he stayed within the womb until there was a guarantee that he wouldn't have to return to another womb. So he was free in the world, and then even though he was completely what we call a Jiva Mukta, a Jiva still having a material body. He was liberated in that body. Despite that liberation and complete freedom from material entanglement, he heard some verses from the Bhagavatam, and those verses attracted him. So while nothing of the world could attract him, the Bhāgavata Purāṇa attracted him. And that's the special feature of his revelation. And of course, once he heard those verses, he did a detailed study of the entirety of the text. And we all know the story. He passed that revelation on to Maharaj Parikshit, and through him for the benefit of all of us. So now Jiva goes on in his presentation, and he says, okay, so here's the revelation of these sadhus, of the author and of a Jivan Mukta, and that we can attain from that some insight into spirituality. Now in his Sandarbha, he says, and we can also attain some insight by an analysis of our own selves, by looking at the nature of our being. What are we? What is the nature of our consciousness? We can acquire some knowledge there as far as what is knowable and of value. And we can also acquire knowledge from Scripture itself as to the world around us. So we'll begin here, an elaboration on Sambandha, intuition of the subject through reference to the individual. The subject, of course, being what is knowable. So the previous two divisions have dealt with the determination of Sambandha, Abhideya, and Prayojan in general terms. These were said to have been directly apprehended through the trans-empirical mode of knowledge in the case of Sri Sukha and Śrī Jīva. This means that they were not arrived at through philosophical reasoning or any sort of logical cognitive process. They were immediately known in consciousness. So that knowing in consciousness, that samadhi, is through a complete self-identification with that other realm of trans-phenomenal reality. And that knowing in consciousness is, what is the word I'm looking for? We come into contact with that through an appreciation of it by self-identification. So really, if we look at this word and this phrase, self-identification, this is really a key to understanding spiritual revelation. Of course, it's the key to understanding our material life. Our material life is all based on self-identification. Unfortunately, what we identify with in material life is a self that has no redeeming characteristics, a self that's temporary, a self that, is existing in a world of death, Martyaloka. So we identify with the body and the body-mind complex that's associated with an existence that has really is foreign to us. For the simple analogy, we're truly a fish outside of water when we look to the nature of the soul wrapped up in material consciousness. But we do self-identify with that. Now, if we can turn our consciousness to spirit, to the nature of the self, and we can begin to identify with that, then that is and puts us on a path of self-realization. And that path evolves, and that hearing, we hear about something and we start to identify with it. Hearing, chanting, remembering, we start to remember. Everything that we start to see in light of that understanding of our spiritual nature. So we're identifying, we're giving up our identification with the material, and we're taking on an identification with the spiritual. In the beginning, that identification is mostly, it's just like any other pursuit of knowledge, but the more we pursue under good direction, a proper self-identification in spirituality, then a whole world opens up for us. And the culmination, part of that culmination is a samadhi, like experienced by Srila Vyasadeva. A samadhi, a walking samadhi in life, like a Srila Sukadeva, where he's walking in the world, but his whole consciousness is identified with his spiritual self. So how can non-dual consciousness be intuited for those who have not had direct experience like Sukha and Vyasa? And we've just kind of discussed how that begins. So this word self-identification, I think, to think in terms of that and realize that one of the stages of that self-identification that begins through the practice of bhakti, begins through identifying with the sadhus, identifying with the guru, identifying with the stories in the scriptures, seeing ourselves in light of that knowledge. And that's going to gradually bring us to a level of remembrance, smaranam, that's going to let us enter into a state of walking samadhi. Srila Bhaktivinoda Thakur said at one point, he says, I see my home as Vaikuntha. Now that's self-identification, completely immersed in trans-empirical reality of one's spiritual position. So, intuition of the subject through reference to the individual. Knowledge systems generally begin with reference to what is already known or available to conscious examination. From the careful inspection of individual consciousness, Vyasti Nirdesh, through the self-illuminating light of Srimad Bhagavatam, the nature of the supreme or source consciousness is made evident. The next thing available to the examiner is the cosmos, samasti nirdesh, or in other words, phenomenality. So we'll go to an Anucheta, part of an Anucheta, the 50th Anucheta, and we'll read through this. Srimad Bhagavatam identifies its subject. So now Jiva Goswami is looking to the Bhagavatam itself as providing to us knowledge of what's to be revealed, Sambandha Gyan. Hereafter, to systematically and thoroughly delineate this same essential truth, Tatparya, of Srimad Bhagavatam, we shall explain in these 6 Sandarbhas the principles of Sambandha, Abhideya, and Prayojan, one after the other. The first of these 3 refers to the subjective reality of which the relation, Sambandha, of signified and signifier pertains. The signify, vacha, is the subject to be described, sambandhi tattva, and the signifier is the text describing it, this scripture. The object of this relation is mentioned in general terms in Srimad Bhagavatam 1.1.2. In the statement, Vejam Vastavam Atravastu, the one truly abiding substantive is the truth to be investigated, the knowable here in Srimad Bhagavatam. The Anucheta continues. Again, I remind you that I have taken out, this is not a complete presentation of the entirety of the Anuchetas or sections of the Tattva Sandarbha, but rather selections from those Anuchetas, and then an elaboration on those through some commentary. So it's very selective what I'm giving you. Otherwise, we would study the entirety of the Sandarbhas, and that would not allow us to get to the subject of the Krishna Sandarbha. So we continue here. Commenting on this part of the verse, Srila Sridhar Swami writes, here in this beautiful Bhagavatam, reality is to be known in its supreme transcendent capacity. Not reality reduced merely to the categories of material substance, dravya, quality, guna, and the like, as taught by the Vaisesikas and others. This verse, 112, is spoken by Sri Vyasadeva. So the great commentator is saying, in this beautiful Bhagavatam, there's a reality to be known, and don't take the Bhagavatam as simply any other text that's going to reduce its subject to components, parts, and categories and qualifications according to our experience in the world. No, this is a transcendent literature that's going to allow us entrance into knowledge of transcendence. So, Srimad Bhagavatam identifies its subject. Here, Śrī Jīva Goswami informs us that in the 6 Sandarbhas, he will explain in detail the very same reality principles of Sambandha, Abhideya, and Prayojan Tattvas directly realized by Sri Vyasadeva and Sukadeva Goswami in the trans-empirical modes of knowledge. In the trans-empirical mode of knowing. He briefly mentioned these principles in Anuchetas 8 and 9 as the truths to be ascertained through a means of valid knowing. In other words, what's the knowable? And he then established Bhagavatam as the most authoritative Prameya in regards to the direct knowing of ultimate reality. So after clearly determining these principles, he will now elaborate on them on the basis of Srimad Bhagavatam. The Tattva, Bhagavat, Paramatma, and Krishna Sandarbhas treat Sambandha Tattva. Bhakti Sandarbha discusses Abhideya Tattva, and Priti Sandarbha deals with Prayojan Tattva. From here on, through the end of Tattva Sandarbha, the discussion is exclusively focused on Sambandha. So now we're truly entering into the text, and he begins the discussion in a very general way at the end of this Tattva Sandarbha by way of utilization of the Srimad Bhagavatam itself as delivering this knowledge. The subject of Srimad Bhagavatam is revealed in its very second verse. The one truly abiding substantive is the truth to be investigated, the knowable here in Srimad Bhagavatam. Vejam vastavam atravastu. As we have discussed already, reality manifests on different dimensions, but Srimad Bhagavatam is specifically concerned only with the self-disclosure of the ultimate reality, Sri Krishna, who encompasses and reconciles all other grades of reality. Going on to Anucheta 51. What is the nature of this substantive, vastu, which is the absolute tattva? This is disclosed in the following statements. All those who have realized absolute reality, tattva, refer to that reality as non-dual consciousness, advaya jnana. Here we come to the first central verse of Sambandha Gyan being presented by Śrīla Jīva Goswami in some detail. So there are two verses from the Bhagavatam upon which the Sambandha Gyan that Śrīla Jīva Goswami bases the entirety of his presentation of Sambandha. Vedanti tat vavidas tatvamyas jnanam advayam brahmeti paramatmeti bhagavan iti sabjate. And then the second verse, of course, is the verse about if we're going to look to these presentations of that non-dual consciousness, then the topmost presentation is Krishnastu Bhagavan Swayam, of all the various tattvas, of all the various manifestations of the supreme absolute truth who come before us in the phenomenal world, all the different descents of the Godhead. This one manifestation, Krishna, is Swayam Bhagavan. So these true verses from the Bhagavatam form the basis of the Sambandha Gyan that is presented by Śrīla Jīva Goswami. And of course, they are the true essence, because that's what Sandarbha means, of what's presented in the Bhagavatam itself. If we can get to this understanding, then we'll have the key to fully unlock all the mysteries of the Bhāgavata Purāṇa. Here the word jnana indicates that the absolute is purely of the nature of consciousness. Additionally, the non-dual nature of this reality is established on the following grounds. One, there is no other reality, tattva, either similar or dissimilar, that is self-existent. Two, the non-dual absolute is supported only by its own inherent potencies. And three, these potencies can have no existence without it as their absolute foundation. This is going to be elaborated on extensively in the second of the Sandarbhas, the Bhagavata Sandarbha. So, intuition of the Supreme Self through an analysis of the characteristics of the individual self. Some self-reflection will help us in understanding the nature, because we are of the nature of consciousness. So if we can analyze the nature of our being, to be a little self-reflective, it gives us a bit of an entranceway into understanding the nature of the supreme consciousness, that non-dual absolute. The jiva is designated by the pronoun tvam, you, in the statement, tat tvam asi, you are that. If it is first grasped through proper deliberation that the jivatma is conscious and eternal, it can easily understand that the Supreme Brahman, designated by the pronoun tat, is of the same essential nature. This is, of course, from the Vedanta Sutra. The deliberation upon the jiva is in order to know the other, the Supreme Brahman. So to impart an understanding of the Supreme, in accordance with that reasoning, Pipalayana Yogendra describes the jiva as being of the same nature as the Supreme when he says to King Nimi, Now, Jiva Goswami is bringing us into the Bhāgavata Purāṇa's 11th canto to look at this a little more deeply, because it is the witness of the different states, childhood, youth, and so on, of the transient material body. This Atma is without birth, growth, decay, or death. Although the Atma is exclusively of the nature of consciousness, present everywhere, eternal, and invariable, it appears to assume various forms under the influence of the sense perception and cognition. Just as the vital force, prana, within the body, although one, appears as if many in contact with the various senses. So in looking deeply at this one verse spoken by Pipalayana, King Nimi, we can see if we become a little contemplative of our situation and we see that our life force extends out from us through our conscious energy, pran, and it basically animates all of our senses. And in that animation, we can interact with the world around us. So if we can begin to do that self-reflection as to the nature of our being, ourselves, excuse me one second, then we can, through that self-reflection, begin to understand how we are beyond the material body, our self, our very essence, just as the life force animates the senses. At certain times, the life force is in a deep sleep where we're not even aware of our senses. So in a similar way, we can see some correspondence between the life force that animates the body and the nature of the Atma, the essence of our very being, animating a material body entirely through all its different stages. And that there is some distinction between the life force, as there's a distinction between the life force and the senses that are brought into action by that life force, there is similarly a distinction between ourself and the body that we inhabit. The logic presented here, which is known as positive and negative concomitants, Anvaya Vyatireka, affirmation and negation, is fourfold in nature. The first argument is based on the difference between that which appears and disappears and that which is beyond such transformations. The second is based on the difference between the seer and the seen, between primordial consciousness and its phenomenal content. The third is based on the difference between the witness and the witnessed. The fourth argument is given as an aid to understanding. Given as an aid to understanding is based on the difference between the entities who undergo suffering, the jivas, and the entity who is the exclusive object of transcendental love, Bhagavan. We can just continue here. In the previous division, the source consciousness tattva was intuited with reference to individual consciousness. Basically, at this point in his tattva Sandarbha, Jiva Goswami presented a few Anuchetas, unpacked the knowledge of Pipalayana, and wherein he truly gives insight into the nature of the Atma that constitutes the essence of ourselves, the Jivatma. So, continuing, in the section of consciousness, tattva was intuited by looking at our individual consciousness. Now, in this division, the same source consciousness is intuited with reference to the universal order as being its ultimate foundation and shelter. So first, we can intuit a little bit about transcendental and the absolute reality and the personhood of that absolute from looking at ourselves. Now, let's intuit some more knowledge of that absolute personality, that non-dual absolute, by looking to the universal order of things and the shelter and the foundation of the phenomenal existence we find ourselves in. This discussion addresses such fundamental problems as the world and creation, causality, and the nature of the living being in both its conditioned and liberated statuses. Through such analysis, we come to know how the absolute is both the ground and support of creation, without undergoing transformation and without becoming implicated in cause-effect conditionality. We learn that creation is in reality evolutionary unfolding from its most subtle principle of Mahatattva or cosmic intellect right down to the Mahabhutas or the gross physical elements. From an alternative perspective, this can be described as the involution of spirit into phenomenality. So now, Jiva Goswami saying, let's look to the Bhāgavata Purāṇa, and let's look to what makes a Purāṇa itself. A major Purāṇa constitutes 10 divisions of knowledge, and we can know, I mean, this is very a comprehensive presentation of the nature of being. So, let's see. Let's continue. This division contains 2 subdivisions. The first, 56 to 60, being an analysis of the 10 topics of Srimad Bhagavatam from the 2nd canto, and the second, 61 to 63, an analysis of the same from the 12th canto. So now he's, just so we know, in this section, at the very end of the Tattva Sandarbha, we're going to look to the 10 topics of a major Purāṇa, and specifically the 10 topics is presented in the Bhagavatam, and they're presented in 2 places. They're presented in the 2nd canto, and I'll talk about those in Anuchedas 56 through 60, and then through 61 through 63, we're going to look at the second presentation of the same 10 topics from the 12th canto. So again, this ties any literary presentation. It's going to have a summary. You'll find a summary of the presentation in the beginning and at the end. So although the 2 lists include different terminology, because there's 2 speakers presenting them, they are shown to be identical both in spirit and context, with some allowance for poetic license. The 10 universals may be expressed as follows. So these are the 10 universals as presented in the major Purāṇa, and it's of course presented in the Bhāgavata Purāṇa, Srimad Bhagavatam. Primordial nature, primordial creation, so Sarga, first creation, cosmic creation, visarga, the secondary creation, sustenances of life, the operation of grace, the matrix of phenomenality, the enactment of dharma for rational thought-based beings, the power of the self-revealing word, coextensive with the reality it signifies, dissolution of life systems, wrapping it all up, liberation, and the ultimate shelter of all, the ashraya. So a little bit from this section. 56th Anucheta. Thus, by describing the essential nature of the living beings, jivas, which is pure consciousness, the absolute truth, tattva, that is the subject of Srimad Bhagavatam, has also been described through individual reference, by intuiting the totality from the individual. This is so because the Supreme Brahman is non-different from the Atma, partaking of the same conscious aspect, akriti, and being the complete whole that encompasses all of its integrated parts. Indeed, he is called the ashraya, the source and shelter of all existence. The same non-dual reality, Brahman, is defined in universal terms, samasti nirdesh, as well through the 10 topics that form the characteristics of a major Purana, beginning with primary creation. These 10 topics are mentioned in the following. And then we get a quote from the Bhagavatam. In this book, Srimad Bhagavatam's 10 subjects are discussed. So this is actually a verse from the end of the second canto, as discussed. 10 subjects: sarga, the original, setting in motion of primordial nature by the Lord, primary creation; visarga, the secondary creation of the primal cosmic being, Brahma; sthana, the sustenance of the living beings; posana, the mercy displayed by the Lord in nurturing his devotees; uti, the subconscious imprints and desires that promote engagement in goal-oriented action. All those impressions that go from one body to the next. We call that karma, and karma manifests differently, from the seeds to the all the way through to the recognized conscious karma that's now influencing us in our existence. Manvantara, the religious path enacted by Manus. In other words, there is some rhyme and reason to the material world. It's not that everything's just happening by chance. Isanu Katha, narrations of the Lord and his devotees. And there is a way for ultimate liberation that's presented in a Purana, a Puranic discourse, which is narration of the Lord's pastimes and activities, his leelas and his devotees. Nirodha, an understanding of how the material world is wrapped up. And mukti, liberation from the material world, so that you do not have to come back the next time the material universe is unfolded. And ashraya, the substratum or the ultimate shelter of individual and collective being, the supreme absolute truth. So the evolution unfolding of Prakriti, Pradhana, this just gives us a quick overview of that evolution, that creation, the glance of Paramatma. First evolutionary point is the Mahatattva, the Chitta. The Pradhan becomes equilibrated. In other words, it falls out of a complete state of equilibrium. The empiric ego, ahankar is the ego, and also the carrying of all those impressions and the unfoldment of their various modes of material nature. Deities, the intellect, senses, the senses and the sense objects, ton mantras, and the material elements. The further unfolding, this is all revealed in the Bhāgavata Purāṇa. Sound available in the sky, available to the ear, touch through the air, available on the skin, form, fire, seen through the eye, taste, water, available in the tongue and smell, earth, nose, all these evolutes progressing, each one enfolding the next level of evolute, enfolding the one before it, until the earth has all these characteristics in it. So then Manvantaras are those 14 Manus. They exist in one day of Brahma. In each day of Brahma, there is a different Manu. And we can see here a chart of the different Manus, the father of the Manus, the name of the major avatar of the Supreme Lord who manifests in that period of Manu. Again, Manu there's 14 in a day of Brahma. So you divide the 1,000 cycles of yugas. That means each Manu presides over approximately 71 yuga cycles. So that's his duration of being the progenitor and the overseer, not the progenitor, but the overseer of affairs within the universe. And also there's a specific king of heaven during that period, an Indra, for each one of those Manus during his 71 yuga cycle reign. So there is some extensive review of the Tattva Sandarbha here, and I'd just like to kind of gloss through it. I don't know if we'll read it all or have time to go through it all in detail, but we will begin. I think we've kind of covered, I've tried to in every class provide some retelling of these basic components of the Tattva Sandarbha, because we've taken, what are we now? I think we're on the 6th class. Because the Tattva Sandarbha is so foundational to entering into the mystery of the Sandarbhas. And interestingly enough, last evening I began reading at the request of Padmanabha. He said I'd find find it interesting to read the Gopal Champu. And it's funny that at the very beginning of that presentation by Śrī Jīva Goswami as to the nature of Vraj Bhakti, that Jiva says, this presentation of Gopal Champu has come out of a thorough understanding of what has been presented in the Krishna Sandarbha. So we can see that truly our entrance into the deepest understanding of the Leela, which is so relishable and which truly captures us and takes us to the spiritual realm. If we can, even Jiva himself is saying, I'm writing Gopala Champu based on the revelation I've presented in the Krishna Sandarbha. So the foundational knowledge of the Sandarbhas allows us a foundation from which we can enter into the mysteries of all the Leelas of the Supreme. And I think that speaks volumes to the significance of a study of the Sandarbhas according to our capacity. If it only involves hearing some classes, at some point, maybe we'd have enough time in older age to enter into an in-depth study. I entered into this study, I think 5 or 7 years ago, when Guru Maharaj said, you need to study the Sandarbhas, and you need to present that knowledge in classes. I want you to do that. It will be a great thing for the Sangha to do that. So I've taken it up as a duty to enter into it. And sure enough, in following that directive, it's really opened up and deepened my appreciation of what is Gaudiya Vaishnavism and how to present Gaudiya Vaishnavism in a much more universal way, and not only to present it, but to understand it, which is, for us, that's the significance of any opportunity that we have to do some outreach in our service. It's meant to foster a more deeper understanding ourselves. So as the more we are willing to go out for the right reasons in presenting, even as unqualified as we may be, and as uneloquent as we may be in speaking and presenting something, although everything may be working against us, in doing it, we will become more familiar with the subject, and our spiritual knowledge will of course will become that much more rich and nourishing. And then when we hear the Leela and enter into study of the various Leela, it just becomes richer and richer. So I'll end here with just a quick overview. This summary of the Tattva Sandarbha comes at the end of the presentation by Satyanarayan Das Babaji, which is the presentation on the Sandarbhas, which we've studied and tried to present within Sri Chaitanya Sangha to the best of our abilities. So the first 8 Anuchetas, as we've spoken, these are the Mangalacharna verses offering homage to the teachers and the worshipful deity. He explains why he's presenting the book and defines its subject as well as the criteria of eligibility for its readers. The next Anuchetas, 9 through 18, he discusses epistemology. This he does in order to determine a valid means of knowing by which the core truths of Sambandha, Abhideya, and Prayoja can be definitely determined. Again, he takes some time in the beginning to show us that this is if we're going to look to a comprehensive solution to all knowledge inquiry, and that's really what true spirituality should give us, then we do need to have a knowledge base which is beyond simply phenomenality. There has to be knowledge that is descending, and that knowledge is Vedic knowledge. And of all Vedic knowledge, then we center on this Srimad Bhagavatam, and he gave very elaborate arguments as to why Srimad Bhagavatam is the best. First, he had to show us that the Vedas are the best because they are descending. There are a Purusheya, and with our senses, the senses, they serve a purpose, but they can be defective. They make mistakes. We come to any form of inquiry with some predisposition as to how the outcome should be based on the way we see the world, or how the modes of material nature influence our seeing and our experiencing and our judgments of the world around us. So, and we make mistakes. We get it wrong. So Brahman, we can go through all this. I think we've kind of covered in a pretty comprehensive manner. Everything is there. That's there. So let's look to this second section. Concerns the self-disclosure of the same truths from the supercognitive samadhi of Srila Vyasa, the author. And this little summary here, the main principles derived from these two sections. These two sections being the sections talking about the samadhis, the revelations of both the author and the speaker, Srila Vyasadeva and Sukadeva Goswami, respectively. The subject to be realized, Sambandhi Tattva, in Srimad Bhagavatam is Sri Krishna. The subjective reality, Sri Krishna, is the original supreme person, Swayam Bhagavan. He is inherently self-endowed with variegated potencies, which are divided into three main categories: intrinsic, extrinsic, and intermediary. Maya, his extrinsic potency, functions under his direction, but cannot control him. 5, the jivas, although integrated conscious parts of Paramatma, are causelessly and beginninglessly bound by Maya. The jivas cannot transcend Maya by their own initiative, as much as we can try. And believe me, there are yogis out there that give it one heck of an effort for lifetimes. They try to free themselves from Maya. And then there can be some problems, even for those great yogis. So we need help. All the help we can get, and the more good help we can find, the better off we'll be. Unconditional turning of awareness and devotional surrender to Bhagavan is the jiva's only means, abhideya, of ultimate attainment. Unconditional being the key word there. And the ultimate completion, prayojana, of such devotional turning culminates in the pervasion of praying, divine love of Krishna. So we're going to stop there. If anyone has any questions, we can certainly entertain those. So far away, if you so desire.
Dulal, Prabhu, can you hear me okay?
I'm hearing you.
Okay.
Excuse me, Mahara, 1 second.
No. Oh, just wait.
Now I can hear you. Go ahead.
Okay. This is probably not a very important question, but it's the one that stumped me while you were talking. You said that liberation comes at the time of the annihilation of the material world. So I thought liberation just included any time you could get liberated.
Well, if I said it in that way, I misspoke. I think what I tried to convey there is the fact that we're talking about the 10 subjects of the Bhagavatam. So we talk about the wrapping up of the material manifestation as one of the 10 subjects, and then one of those 10 subjects is liberation, moksha. So it's just one of the 10 subjects of the Bhagavatam. So your question is liberation is not automatic. Is that kind of what you thought I said, or?
What did you say my question was? It's not automatic?
No, liberation is not an automatic part of the unfolding and manifestation of the material universe, and then the infolding of the material universe back into, Karna Dakshai Vishnu or Narayan. So he manifests the universe, but it is a possibility of and presented in the Bhagavatam as one of the subjects. So there's definitely an annihilation, but you can also annihilate your material existence. And that's commonly referred to as liberation.
Okay, thank you.
All right. All right. Well, thank you so much, everyone, for your association. I hope this presentation has nourished you in some way. Vanchakapatubhischa, Kripasinabhevacha, Patitanam Bhavebhyo, Vaishnavijinamo Namaha.
Thank you.
Krishna Kirtana Ganana Tana Pano Premamritam Manidhi Dhira Dhira Jana Priyau Priyakarau Nirmasanau Pujitau Śrī Chaitanya Kripa Bharau Bhuvi Bhuva